Yes, yes, now
Yeah,
it's
okay.
visible.
Yeah, most likely you can see my full screen. I wanted to share
Yes,
just the. Oh, that's fine. Okay.
yes. Sir, can we just start the
Yeah,
talk
sure,
now?
sure, sure. We can start. We can start. Yeah, good.
Okay, so good evening all. We are about to start our talk. So here I would like to request CS Yadav sir to introduce our speaker.
Okay, thank you, Afra. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Srikanth Sugavanam.
Thank you.
In fact, I'm among the first faculty who met him after his joining. We used to have a dinner together in a guest house that time. So, Dr. Srikanth is assistant professor in our School of Computer and Electrical Engineering. He joined last year. And Srikanth did his BSc in physics, and as well as he did the BTech in optics and photonics, and from University of Kolkata. And after his bachelor's degree, he moved on to Europe, and he did MS degree as a part of this Erasmus Mundus program, and it's a joint MS degree from Warsaw University of Technology, Poland, and Frederico Schiller University, Germany. So after his master's, he did his PhD from Austrian Institute of Photonic Technology, and in 2015, and where he continued working as a postdoctoral researcher also for the further period. And he has a strong specialization or expertise in the field of fiber laser dynamics, especially the real-time intensity and spectral measurement studies on this laser system, linear and non-linear dynamics of the system. And besides these things, he studies optical metamaterials and Raman fiber lasers and random fiber lasers. They are many interesting topics. In the coming time, we will come to know a lot about them. And he has a very excellent publication. And he has published in a journal like Nature Photonics and Nature Communication. And so he has an excellent background in the field of photonics. So a student, especially in the physics or engineering student interested in the photonics, they will be certainly very much benefited with his presence in the campus. They can take a lot of guidance. And Srikanth, I was discussing with him yesterday, he conducted a workshop course on this academic writing. So looking at his blogs, I found that he has a detailed course on this constructive alignment for academic writing. There are various parts of this philosophy and other things. And surprisingly, for today's talk, I looked at the title of this, and it says how to stop thinking and start writing. And so just by reading this title, I started thinking that what would be there in this presentation, because once you stop thinking, then what will you do? So I'm really very much interested for this particular talk. Yeah. So thank you very much, Srikanth, for accepting students' offer. So now I hand over to you. Thanks. So please carry on.
Yeah. So thanks, Shekhar. Thanks for this very, very warm welcome, and also thank you to SCRI for inviting me to get this talk. I'm really happy that I can do this. It's 1 year late in coming, but still I'm happy that I'm able to do this, because writing is something which is very close to me. It's very passionate. I'm very passionate about it, because I think that everybody has something to say, and I would like to offer some tools which will allow them to say it more effectively. So that's what science is all about. You're doing science, you're making new discoveries, but most of the time, because it gets a bit too technical, and sometimes you're already so much deep into the work, the way you express it doesn't come out as somebody who's going to read it for the first time may not be able to make that link of how much hard work you have put into it. So I just hope that what we talk about today will help you to cross that small boundary and also reach out to more people. So like Shekhar said, yes, the topic on the blogs is constructive alignment in academic writing, and that is actually the the underlying framework for which my techniques are based on. But essentially, it is about how to stop thinking and start writing. And what I mean by that is this, so we can get ahead with the presentation now. So what I mean when I say how to stop thinking and start writing is this. So this is the blank canvas problem. So when you are starting to write, or when you're starting to paint, or when you're starting to do anything, you have a lot of ideas in your head. And there is always this problem where you suddenly see a piece of paper or you see a blank screen and you have to put your thoughts. And at least I have found that when you are just coming back from the lab, when you've taken all your results or you've done a numerical simulation, and you see that you have got this huge chunk of information and you don't know where to start. That's basically the blank canvas anxiety, or the paralysis that gets you when you want to start writing. So this has always happened with me, and what really helps is to just stop thinking as to what to write, and you just have to start writing. And that is what I mean by you have to stop thinking, how should I present it, should I write that, what figures to include. You just have to start basically writing on a piece of paper and let it take you where it goes. So what I hope is by the end of today's talk, you'll be able to go from this scenario of this blank canvas anxiety to this where you actually get to writing, like you feel that, okay, now I know what to do. And you can get through that first draft as fast as possible, because the first draft is the toughest, because the first draft is going to be the most ugliest, but you have to get beyond that. But to get beyond that, you have to get that first draft in. So today is all about the first draft. And today is all about taking you from the blank canvas to writing is awesome. Okay, so what is the underlying philosophy? And that's that's the more academic oriented, or using constructive alignment for academic writing title. But essentially, it's how to stop thinking and start scientific writing. And yeah, so let's just to give you a bit of background, what is the underlying philosophy of this technique. So the underlying philosophy of technique actually comes from designing academic courses themselves. So there is a very well-known and a well-practiced philosophy, or a theory, you can say a model of building courses, and it's called the Biggs principle of constructive alignment. So whenever you're out to design a course, you have a certain learning outcomes. So if you're teaching a course and say you want to teach students physics, then you say that, okay, I want students to know Newton's law. I want them to know about fluid dynamics. I want them to be able to apply these concepts, and I want them to be able to build something. So these are the learning outcomes. And you design your learning activities, your assessments, and the feedback that you get both from the students, and also you kind of give the students feedback on building up on their knowledge. So all of that is designed in such a way that it all feeds back into this learning outcomes. So whatever you say, even if you're making a quiz, even if you're making designing materials, you'll find that all of them link back to the learning outcomes. So that is how it should be done as per Biggs principle of constructive alignment. So just a few technicalities here. So the constructive aspect here refers to the idea that learners construct meaning through relevant learning activities, and the teaching and the assessment methods are aligned with the intended learning outcomes. So everything actually links back to that learning outcomes, what you want the students to learn. So if you're designing an experiment, it has to link back to that learning outcomes, right? So that's the Biggs principle. And now what you can do is you can extend this principle, and you can extend this principle to your own communication of your scientific results. So what do I mean by that? The essence of communication, or the most important task of a scientist, is to communicate their discoveries, and they communicate it through academic writing, through writing papers, through writing, to going to conferences, to making presentations. And essentially here too, there is an element of constructive alignment, because you want your audience to learn what you have done. You want to show them results which link back to your theories, your hypotheses. So the results that you present, the simulations, the experiments, the analysis, and say even the peer review. So even the peer review process here contributes to how you structure your paper, right? So this, in essence, is transferring that concept of learning for students to learning to a peer group, to your peer group of scientists. The paper that you write is essentially you teaching your peers or telling your peers what you did. And that paper, whatever you present in that paper, has to be tied back to your learning outcomes, to the protocols, the results. The result is the hypothesis is this, the model is this. This is what links to different aspects. This is the simulation that shows that this is correct. This is the analysis that shows that this is correct. So this is where constructive alignment from education comes and fits itself into a constructive alignment for academic writing. So if we just borrow the underlying principle from Biggs and recast it in the case of constructive alignment, what we can say is the constructive aspect here refers to the idea that learners construct meaning from our presented results. Okay, so that's number one. And number two is the evidence that is presented for the results and the way in which they are presented. So it's not just the evidence, just the evidence, it's also the way in which they are presented. They are aligned with the results that we intend to present. Okay, so that is the underlying framework, the theoretical framework for the techniques that I'm going to discuss today. Okay, and just to give you an idea of that, just to give you evidence that this technique is actually effective and it's very useful. Both these articles, so the first article is written by me. So this article was written by a PhD student. Both of these articles were based on the principles of this technique, principles of constructive alignment. Okay. I also use this for, I have used this extensively for writing project reports. So whenever you have a project, we have to report it to the guys who gave us the money. So I've used it extensively for making project reports. I have also used it for not writing one, not two, but 3 fellowship grants. So it works. It really helps you to write fast, extremely fast. Okay. And the very presentation that you see here is also based on this technique of constructive alignment. Okay. So since we say that this technique is based on constructive alignment, let's just see what the outline of today's session is. Let's start with that. So the outline of today's session is going to be, you all, since you're here, I would like to assume that you already know what a typical academic article looks like, but it all has this basic bare bones. So I'll just show you the basic bare bones. I'll talk about the abstract and how it is important and how it is relevant in the context of today's topic, how you can structure it, and what are the tools that you can use. And finally, I'll help you design your own workflow, which will help you to write your first draft as fast as you can. Okay. So in the principle, in the flavor or in the spirit of Biggs' constructive alignment theory, the learning outcomes of today's sessions will be, you'll be able to identify the analogies between constructive alignment in learning and constructive alignment in academic writing, which we have already slightly touched. You will use writing devices to structure your academic writing for facilitating constructive alignment. You'll be able to choose between different brainstorming and decision-making tools to further aid your constructively aligned writing. And finally, you will be able to evaluate and design your own workflow to generate academic literature, not academic literature in the general sense, and that ensures constructive alignment with the intended learning outcomes of your work. So these are all very big words. I agree. This is very technical. It's extremely, there is a lot of jargon in it. But as we go through the sessions and when we reach to the end of the session today, you'll see that all of this actually maps to what you'll be learning today. Okay, so let's get started. One disclaimer that I would like to state here is this is a very experimentalist perspective. So over the number of times I've given this talk, there have been some questions where the approaches taken by really hardcore theoreticians, that's very different from how I write my papers, but it's a very good starting point for discussion, and we might be able to still find some parallels on how to structure and write this paper, even remaining within this framework. All right, so that's number one. And number two is I'm still figuring it out for literature reviews. So the literature review is a different beast on itself, and the techniques that you need to use is different. The philosophy itself is different. So I'm still trying to figure it out. But once I figure it out, you'll be the first people to. Okay. So let's get started with the academic article and what are the desirables of the academic article. So a typical structure of an academic article is something like this. You have an abstract summary, you have got introduction, results, methods, results and analysis, discussion, references, and acknowledgement statements. Okay, so this is a typical structure which should come across in various orders, and maybe some of the papers would actually drop this kind of distinction altogether. But in general, you will see that a typical paper would include these items. Okay, and here's also something that will help as we go along the way. How people read papers. So this is again from a very nice article. I can leave some links for you guys to read on later. And this is how different people read papers. And if you see here, the most important thing to note is people start by reading the abstract in the most general sense. They'll start by reading the abstract, then they look at one or two figures, and then they look at the conclusion and summary. And this is how most PhD students or postdocs who have so many other things to do and so much of literature to get through actually read papers. You skim. First you skim, you look at the abstract, you look at the paper figures, and you try to figure out whether this relates to your work or not. And then you look at the conclusion. What are the primary results? And the idea here is when a person writes an abstract, they say that I've done something. And when you read the conclusion or summary, then you realize that you try to figure out whether that person has done what they said they are going to do. And based on that, you say, okay, I'll spend my time on that paper. So clearly, the abstract, the summary, and the figures are the most important parts of the paper. This makes it very, very clear. Okay, so let's keep this in mind and let's proceed. Okay. So what is the ecosystem that we're dealing with here? So we have got the abstract, we got the figures, we got different article sections. Some of the bigger papers also offer supplementary information sections. So you got another like 10 or 15 odd pages where you can go into more details about the analysis you have done. Sometimes you also have animations. And in a typical paper, all of them are linked together like this. So we have to unravel this mesh and try to figure out how to present this information. And to do that, we must keep in mind what are the good attributes, what are the attributes of a good paper. So you expect at least these 3-4 items from all good papers, which is properly evidenced, the paper is relevant and timely, the information that it presents is accurate, and it also presents enough information for reproducibility. Okay, so this means that it's a good paper. But what sets it apart from a very good paper is if that paper is also self-critical and the communication is very clear. So typically what happens is when you are working on a scientific idea for say years, because say you're starting off your PhD, you'd be spending at least 2 years before you start writing a very like your own paper where you're structuring your ideas. So by that time, you're so much into the field that you don't even realize that you are talking at a higher level of comprehension and understanding, and you are communicating ideas which the other person is not able to receive. Okay, so you have to step back a bit. You have to be a bit self-critical. You have to self-analyze. You have to kind of weed out the jargon, and you must have to the point emphasis, and you must be able to communicate with clarity. And this is what makes a really good paper. A paper which is worth reading, people spending their time and actually talking about it also. Because nowadays you also have social media, and that is also very, very important. Because people start talking about it in social media and say, oh, this is a very good paper, you should read about it. And it's very well written, and all the evidence is presented very clearly. So that also you get some footage. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. I'm sure that all of you are already well versed in these concepts, in these attributes, but this is where we'll be trying to hit to. How to be self-critical of your own work and how to communicate with clarity. Okay, and what do I mean by clarity? Okay, so let's take this example of an interview, and if you start reading this, I'm sure you might be able to guess who this person was who was giving this interview. And it's very hard to fathom, like, what is he talking about? Like, he just goes on rambling, and then you wonder that, okay, why am I here at all? Okay. So you end up asking, what's your point? Okay. Because if you keep on rambling, there is no point. You want the people to get very fast to the matter in hand. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to tell you about the abstract. So what is the purpose of the abstract, right? The purpose of the abstract is to prime the reader. It sets a scene and the context, and it tells about the work. What's the point? And it presents the main findings. Okay. So this is what it essentially is. Let's take another analogy, right? Nowadays, YouTube is awash with trailers. Right? So what separates a very good trailer from a very bad trailer? Because when you see a very good trailer, you would want to watch the movie, right? So that's what the trailer is, nothing but the abstract of the movie, right? So it kind of grabs your attention. It says that this is worth spending your time and money and popcorn money behind it. Okay, I'll go and watch the movie. Well, not in the current context, but you are drawn, you're attracted to watch the full movie. You're willing to spend your time behind it. Okay. And the trailer and the abstract essentially give the learning outcome. So what are you going to, well, in a movie, you might not be learning something, but at least you know, okay, I'm going to watch an action sequence, or there's going to be marvelous special effects like the Eternals, for instance. So those are the things that you know that you're going to get out of that paper or from the movie. And it builds anticipation. And essentially what it is, it's an elevator pitch. So is there, does anybody not know what an elevator pitch is? Okay, so I think that the communication is one way, not a problem. So what, let me just talk a bit about the elevator pitch. The idea is simple. You get onto you are going from the ground floor to the 10th floor, and suddenly Elon Musk steps into the elevator. You want money. Elon Musk has money. How do you convince him within 10 floors to give you some money? That's basically an elevator pitch. Within that span of 10 floors, you must be able to communicate your idea so clearly that Elon Musk is willing to fund your venture. Okay, so that's basically an elevator pitch. And the abstract is essentially an elevator pitch. So what I think this is the best example of how you can structure an abstract, and this is from the Nature group of journals, and this is also available online. So this basically shows you how the a general abstract is structured. Okay, so you have one or two in sentences in beginning which provides a general introduction to the field, because articles which are published in Nature or Science, these are written for a general scientific audience. These relate to discoveries which will impact the whole scientific field. And you want everybody to be able to, as a well-informed scientist from various disciplines, to be able to understand what the paper is about and what information they can get out of it. So it is written in this very general form, but it's not just a general layperson. It is a proper scientific paper, but it kind of leads the reader into it. So here you see that the first two sentences are, they provide a basic introduction to the field. 2 or 3 sentences go into a more detailed background, okay, about which is comprehensible to the scientists in related disciplines. 1 sentence clearly states the general problem. And then you have this sitting here, which shows that here we show what your paper is actually about. Then you have 2 or 3 sentences about your main results, 1 or 2 sentences which again tries to put it in a general context. So essentially answering the question, why should I be worried, or why should I be reading this paper at all? How is it going to help me? Okay, so that's the general context here. And then to an even broader perspective. Okay, so this is for, say, you might have policymakers who might be interested in your paper. And while they may not understand the scientific part of it, they would like to know where this research sits within the funding landscape, within, say, how the science is going to develop in the next 10 years and where they should be investing their time and money. So this paragraph is more for people who are looking to diversify, looking to fund your research, making policies for future work. Okay. And this is essentially, you can view this as a sand glass. Okay, you can use this as a hourglass model, where at the top you're talking about this very broad research, broad perspective, and then you have your main result, which is kind of focusing into what your actual field is, and then again diversifying and saying that where your research sits, your output, your results, and your discoveries sit in the general framework and the general landscape of science. So this is a very good abstract. This is how you should be writing an abstract, saying that, okay, this is how my science is actually going to help. Okay, so what I would like is, there was a small asterisk, if you would note, in the initial slide right next to my title, and that asterisk essentially meant that I'll be giving you homework. Okay, and what I would like you to think about is how, if you were Einstein, or if you were Dame Jocelyn Bell, or if you were one of the three Nobel laureates who won the the Nobel Prize for the lithium-ion battery, how would you be structuring that elevator pitch for them? How would you be writing that abstract for them? So you can limit your explanations to about 150 words or less, and you can use the nature abstract. So this is a very good exercise to putting into perspective what people have already done. And then you can start thinking about how you can structure your abstract, the abstract of your paper yourself. Okay, so this is what I would suggest. And you don't have to always follow the rule. You can always break the rules. And I like this particular example very much, because this is essentially saying that this is the title of the paper, which says, does the one-dimensionalizing model show intermittency? And the abstract is simply no. So you can break the rules now and then, but if you are writing a paper, say for the first time, or say it is more conventional, whatever you're doing, I would recommend that you stick to the rules of writing the abstract as per the nature abstract model or the elevator pitch. So I hope that kind of resonates with you to a certain sense. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them at this point. Okay, fine. Thanks. I got Yogesh's message. Okay, so now let's see how you can structure your article. Okay, there are many ways you can do it. One way that I like to work with is carrying over analogies from other fields. Okay, and I like to work with something called the verse chorus musical form. And what this essentially is, again, this is technical words, jargon, and all that. Basically, even when you say when somebody composes music, they follow structure. Okay. And that structure, there are many forms of the structure. There are ABAB forms, ABC forms, and all that. But if you listen to pop music these days, and they follow this structural form, which is called verse chorus. It starts off with an introduction. Then there is a verse which begins the story, and then you've got the chorus, which is the hook of the song. And this is all okay. Then you've got verse 2, which is part 2 of the story. Then you've got chorus, which is reinforcing the hook by repetition. You've got the bridge, where things get interesting, and then you finally have the chorus. You might have a cadence. A cadence is like a fancy thing where you modulate to a different scale, and then you finally kind of wrap it up all together. One example that I like to give, one which perfectly fits this kind of verse chorus musical form, is in the process. But the more recent one would be Ed Sheeran's Shape of You, which also follows more or less this form. If you listen to it, you have this introduction, chorus, verse, chorus form, and you also have a bridge. So this is the verse chorus. Interestingly, you can actually map it to an academic paper too. So you can start off with an introduction, which sets the mood, which shows like, okay, what is the general field? What is it? What are you going to talk about? Then you enter into the results section, which begins the story. You have the chorus, which is the primary result. Okay. Now you can start thinking that your primary results are the hook of the main results. So you say that, okay, this is what I was out to prove, and this is the primary result of the paper. So that is the hook of the paper. And this is also the most memorable part of the paper, often also the title. You've got part 2, which is next result. That's the second part. Then again, you go back to your initial hooks and say that, okay, this is the second result, but it links back to the first result I presented. It reinforces what I said that is my hypothesis, or what I said I'm going to do. So again, you have got your chorus. Okay. Then you have got the bridge, where you can actually talk about, we weren't expecting this, but you have these scientific discoveries where you set out to do something, and then along the way, you find out something else interesting. If it is something extremely interesting, then you go ahead and write a separate paper on it altogether. But then if it's not to something that you can build up on extensively, but it is extremely relevant to your work, you would say that, yeah, we also found this, but you can also kind of build a kind of, you can say that we weren't expecting this, but we still found this. And that kind of adds some more value to your paper. And finally, you go to the chorus, and the discussion is the cadence. So this is what I meant. So if you look up the definition of a cadence, it essentially kind of goes back and forth, and it's kind of a reevaluation of what has been composed before, in some sense. The discussion section of the paper, I think, is the most important part of the paper, especially if you are starting off as a scientist. So if you are a PhD student or a postdoc, the discussion is where you can actually show how much you know about the field, because you can say how your result is relevant. You can be self-critical. You can say that, yes, I found this, but it is not the best, but it can be improved in this way, which shows that you're also thinking ahead. So the discussion is where you can actually literally show off. And this is a very important part of the paper. So this is how you can actually see how the verse chorus musical form maps to the academic paper. Okay, so if we have a one-to-one mapping, this is how it will look like. So that's a very good mapping, and I like to use this because pop music is is a tried and tested form of making people getting hooked to songs. Why shouldn't we carry it over to academic papers? And I kid you not, all of my papers, starting from when I started writing this, starting from when I developed these techniques, they all use this verse chorus musical form. You can pick up any of my papers. You'll see that after every primary result, I kind of go and say, this is what I wanted to do. This is what I wanted to do. Reinforcement. Okay. So you can make a one-to-one map. This is not the only structure that you might want to use. You've got other examples also. So there's this context, content, conclusion form, which is also very effective. And there are other structures out in the wild. The idea being here that you need to have structure in your paper, and you need to fix that structure early on. Be it the verse chorus musical form, be it the context, content, conclusion, it doesn't matter. Pick a structure, and that's very important. Okay? And when you do pick a structure, you should also remember that the hooks are the learning outcomes of your paper. Okay? And your writing needs to align with these hooks to enable construction of meaning. Okay? So whenever you're writing something, always question yourself whether whatever you're writing actually links back to what you have written in your abstract, what you said are the main results of your paper. Does it add to meaning, add to the meaning of what you set out to show? Okay. And that's how you can enable, and that's how you can ensure that your writing is aligned with the learning outcomes. The writings are aligned with the abstract. Okay. So the question you always need to ask is, does your writing reinforce your hooks? Okay. Good. So now let's get to the tools. So how can you ensure, or what are the tools that you can use to ensure this constructive alignment? Okay. So one of the tools I love to use almost all the time is a mind map. And the mind map is the first tool I go to, because you can really dump your ideas. You have come from an experiment, you have done a lot of numerical simulations, and there are several different aspects to it. Okay, so a mind map will actually help you dump all of these things and then start to group them together in clusters. So what you see here is my actual travel checklist. So I actually use this. And what I start off by just dumping things which I need to take along. And then I slowly start grouping light things together, because I do that because I know that the clothes are going to be in the wardrobe. I know that my electronics are going to be in one place. My documents are going to be in one place. My toiletries are going to be in my washroom. So I can quickly go and just put everything in my bag. Okay. So the same thing with writing an article also. If you've got too many things in your brain because you've just come back from the experiment and you want this, you want that in your paper, you want to present your log graph, you want to show your efficiency, everything, put it all in the mind map and then slowly start clustering those ideas together. What do you have in your whole set of results and how you are going to cluster them? This helps you to kind of map your sections also. Okay, you see that, okay, this section has got more information, fine, then this needs to go there. This section has relatively less information, then maybe I'll just not consider it in my paper or leave it for a workshop or something, or a conference. So even the mind map, even though it's very simple and it's just like a dumping space, it actually starts helping you with the writing process. Okay, so that's number one. The next thing I do is I use 3 rubrics. And what are these? I use the SWOT, I use the SWOC, and I use the noise. So I use these rubrics, especially when I'm trying to be self-critical and I'm trying to write the discussion section, or whether I'm trying to analyze, say I want to analyze a particular graph that I've made. And I know that that graph say for Ohm's law, for instance, right? So the Ohm's law, you know that the graph is going to be a straight line. But then you can also start writing around it. What will happen if the resistance is more? What will happen if I keep on running the current through it? What will happen if my power supply is wavering? It's not stable. So these rubrics will actually help you to find these points that you can write around the results that you have. So for instance, if you're constructing a device, or say you have found out a new material and you want to know whether you can use it for certain applications or not. Okay, so the SWOT or the SWOC is perfect for this because it tells you what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunities, and what are the challenges. So you can very quickly and very easily structure your one like 200-word paragraph for your figure immediately. You can jot down what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the challenges, and what are the threats. So maybe you're using something made of lead, so you don't want to use that. So you might want to replace it with something else. And then that's where your opportunities come in. You said, yeah, now I've done it with lead. Maybe at a certain point in time, I can do it with something else less toxic. So the SWOT and the SWOC really help you to do that very fast, right? Noise is also something that I use for when I'm building devices. So I'd say that, okay, these are the needs, these are the opportunities, this is what I've done, and this is how I can also make improvements. And these are the exceptions under which this device won't work. So for instance, if it's a biomedical application, I would say that, okay, it'll work for this, and this tissue, but it will not work for that tissue. So these are the exceptions. So here, what I'm trying to say is these might seem like general knowledge, but the point is these actually provide you structure. So you don't have to think too much. Once you have your figure, once you've already done your experiment, it's very fresh in your mind. The idea is you come and start dumping things using these three rubrics. You immediately go to your figure, you immediately say, okay, what are the strengths, what does this figure mean, and all that, and you start jotting it down. So these 3 rubrics will actually help you. Okay, so the noise is great for introduction and hooks too. So for introduction, it's perfect because you're trying to do something in a field, and you want to say, okay, these are the needs of the field, these are the opportunities, these are the improvements that can be made, this is what I have done, these are the strengths of my results, these are the exceptions. So now let's start talking about the article. So it very nicely leads into the main results of your paper. Okay, so you can use noise. And SWOT and SWOC are also perfect for discussion sections, as I already discussed. Okay. Then you also have reflective thinking. So there are 2 cycles. So let's start with the first one. There is something called a Kolb-reflective cycle. And here, this is applied in various cases. Basically, this applies to sociology experiments and trying to figure out whether something that you did is actually helping you in certain way or not. Okay, this is particularly used if you want to develop new techniques for teaching, and you want to see if a particular methodology worked, and if it worked, why it worked, and if it didn't work, why you think it didn't work. Okay, so you start off with an abstract conceptualization, and you move on to the active experimentation phase. Okay, so we can actually take a scientific take on this too. So we can say that, okay, you have a hypothesis. You say that, okay, salt should dissolve in water. Okay. So then you say that, okay, fine. Then you go ahead and do this active experimentation. You take salt, you take water, and then you do that experiment, and then you add the salt to the water, and then you see that it's dissolving, but it's also creating effervescence. And then you wonder what happened. That's where your reflective observation comes in. And then you kind of conceptualize and say that, okay, then it could be that there is something else in that salt, which is not pure common salt, but something else. And then you realize that somebody made a prank on you and they replaced the salt with Eno, and that's where you see this effect. So then you again say that, okay, so that was the reason, but why are we getting effervescence? So then your next cycle of active experimentation starts. This is a very vague example, but you can also relate it to the experiments that you do. Okay, you start off with an hypothesis and you say that, okay, fine, let's say, let's take a concrete example. What would be good? Let's say that you're working with a sample and you say that if I'm going to excite it at a certain wavelength, it should lead to fluorescence, and should lead to fluorescence at this particular wavelength. So you start building that's your abstract conceptualization. Then you do your active experiment where you take the sample, you irradiate it with a laser of that particular wavelength that you said is the excitation wavelength. And then you start to do your experiment where you see where the phosphorescence or where the fluorescence is coming in. So that's your concrete experience. So once you do that, you see that, okay, I'm getting a peak, but I'm also getting a secondary peak somewhere else. Okay, so then you start thinking, okay, why am I getting that secondary peak? And then you make another hypothesis. So you're completing that Cope cycle. Okay. So then you can also do an additional step. The additional step being that you can go into you can use another framework of reflective thinking, which is Gibbs cycle. So here, when you're doing this reflective observation, you can even structure that reflective observation. So first of all, it's going to be what happened, an honest restatement of the activities and outcomes. So what you observe, so you observed a second loop. Okay. So if you observe the second loop, what are your first impressions? So, or what are your intuitions? Then you evaluate. Could it be because that maybe you placed the sample in such an odd way that you got some interference effect? So then you kind of evaluate whether the experiment that you actually did was valid or not. And then you kind of be self-critical about it. Okay. And then you do something called an analysis, like this is actually related to the evaluation. And you ask, okay, you say that, okay, why? So this 5 whys thing is quite interesting because they say that if you're going to do something, or if you think there is a reason to something, you just ask yourself why 5 times. By the time you reach the 5th why, you more or less have a good picture of what you were actually setting about to do. Okay. Yeah. What I meant was, I'm sorry, I'll just retrace my steps a bit. So 5 whys essentially means that by the time you reach the 5th why, you'll either hit at the answer of why a certain thing is happening, or you'll understand that what your initial premise, the initial question itself was false, and you again start questioning from a different angle. So the 5 whys things works, and then you can summarize it. And once you summarize it, what you can do is you can frame your next plan, and that leads to your abstract conceptualization. Okay. So what is all of this? So let's again take a step back and just look at these 2 cycles. Okay, what is all of this? So this is actually going to help you to write whatever I talked about for the past 10 minutes on. Essentially, you can put it on a piece of paper. You can essentially say that this is the starting of your primary results, for instance, the first verse, right? So you say that this was the hypothesis I started off with. This is the experiment I made. This was the observation that I did. And then once you do that, you can enter into the Gibbs cycle, and then you can write, okay, what happened? What are the first impressions? What is the evaluation? What is the good, bad, and ugly of it? And then you summarize, and then you say, then you can go to the next result. We found the secondary lobe, fine. We think that it is because of Raman scattering, fine. We are going to set out to prove that it's because of Raman scattering, and for that we'll do the next experiment. So that leads to the abstract conceptualization, and the next active experimentation phase starts again. Right? So this is a framework which will actually help you to describe what you did. And if you want to be able to describe what you did effectively, you need to write within 1 or 2 days of doing that actual experiment, be it numerical, be it experimental. Okay, so you need to actually do your experiment, get all your results in place, come and start writing. Don't think about it's your first draft, it's going to be very bad. So take that word from me. You might think that it's very good when you write it, come back to the next day, you'll just look at it and say, who wrote this? Okay, but the idea is you're putting everything in one place, and that gives you that fodder to actually structure something. It's that wet piece of clay which you slap onto your desk to start making something. If you don't slap that clay, nothing will come out. So you need to find that clay, you need to get that clay and put it on your table. This is what the first draft is all about, and these are the tools that will help you to get that first draft out. Okay. Then you have figures. Like I've already established, figures are essential. Figures are things which capture your attention immediately. Okay, so like the first interview question, the interview answer that we saw, people read the abstract, they look at figures, they try to get information out of it. This is very risky because if you don't do your figures properly, people will get a very different meaning out of it, and they will think that the paper is something else, and they will not end up reading the paper at all. Or they will see that, okay, the figure tells me this, but the conclusion tells me something else. This paper is not worth reading, and they'll just chuck it out. So even figures need to be well structured, and they need to align with the results that you want to share. Okay, so let's take a simple example. Let's take this example where you have got a poster, and here you've got the first item, which is extremely huge. Then you got the second item, which is like moderately huge, and the third item, which is like smaller than the above two. And this is called the 1, 2, 3 punch style. And I must say at this point that I should have done this. I must say that the poster that for this present talk itself was actually structured in that form. So you had the first, the title of the paper, the title of the poster was huge, and that was the first thing you read. And then you had other information coming in a different styles. It's not something which has been chosen out of just like throwing font sizes and anything. There has been thought which has gone to the design of the paper, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for that. And it actually links very well with what I want to talk about today. The 1, 2, 3 punch is a very powerful tool, and it is actually used not only for designing advertisements, you can also use it for designing your figures. Your figure, the most important thing that you want people to see has to be extremely clear. That if you want to highlight the straight line, then that should just be, there shouldn't be any subplots there. There should just be that one plot, which shows that it's extremely a straight line. For instance, when we are designing lasers, we want to show that there's a very clear threshold. So that behavior has to be very clean, and that's the only thing that the people have to see. If you've got other information that you want to show, say you want to show that the linearity is kind of deviating at higher powers, that's a different graph altogether. It doesn't belong there. So you don't need to highlight it there. So you got the first punch, which is the biggest one, and the second and the third punches. Okay. And you can link it with your writing also. Okay. So if you have got one big graph, you spend more time writing about it, and you can use the rubrics, and you can use the reflective writing strategy for it, and you can actually start structuring the write-up which goes with the figure based on what is there in the figure. Okay, so see how we are linking things. So first of all, we have got the abstract. Now we are taking again a step back. We have got the abstract, which talks about learning outcomes. We have got the structure of the paper where we know that where we are going to emphasize those learning outcomes. Okay, we have also shown how you can write the parts, different parts of the paper. So we know how to use walks, we know how to use the reflective writing cycles, and now we have the figures. So the results that you present in the figures need to align with the abstract, need to align with the learning outcomes of the paper, and they must emphasize the hooks, and the hooks come towards the end of your results, the chorus part, right? So that's how you need to structure. So if you take a letter, for instance, a letter is a very concise way of writing a paper, right? But even if you take a look at the letter, there are like 2 or 3 figures tops, not more than that. But if you look at how they are structured, the figures, you don't have a lot of space also to present those figures, but those figures will have enough information to actually help you understand what the paper is about. Okay, so keep this in mind: abstract, figures, and conclusion, learning outcomes, and structure. And then you more or less have your framework from which you can start writing. Okay, so coming back to the figure, you have the first message, the first huge. So you'll talk about, say, 200 words about huge. You'll talk about garage sale, which is about, say, 100 words. And then you've got multifamily, which you might talk about for, say, 50 words. And you already have a small section that goes with your figure. So you've written something. Okay. Okay. And then you can have a cadence here, which links all these 3 figures together. And then you finally link it up to your hook. So we can talk about figures. Figures itself is a very huge topic, representing, showing, talking about more effective ways of representing your data, how to make it clean. But that takes us in a different direction. That takes us into design. That takes us into actually design principles, into art. So we can reserve it for some other day. But there are very good examples out there. What I would say is you can look into this book by Edward Tufte, Tufte. They have got very good examples. The design principles there can be carried over to structuring your figures. Okay. Right. And I would also like to highlight something about this hashtag better poster. And this was a movement, I think about 1 to 2 years back. And this actually talks about how posters are also getting extremely cluttered, and how we can do a better job of making better posters. And that's why the hashtag better poster. And this is not just based on some design principles, but it's also based on how people gather knowledge. So it talks about cognitive overload, it talks about foraging principles, it talks about communication principles also. And finally, it does talk also about designing better posters. Okay, so I would request you to actually take some time to look into what they mean by this hashtag better poster. There are 2 videos. The generation 2 is more entertaining, and also it is based on a lot more evidence than generation 1. So do have a look at it, and I hope that you might be also able to find some links with what we have discussed so far today, and it will also help you to design better posters. Okay. Okay. So now let's get to designing your workflow and how you can go about doing that. Okay. So let's look at the ecosystem again. So the ecosystem was where you had this very fancy looking mesh, but now let's structure it a bit, because we also learned a bit more. So we start off with the philosophy, the underlying philosophy, which is constructive alignment, where you got the abstract, the rationale, the aims, the learning outcomes. And you have the article sections, which is the introduction, results, analysis, discussion, conclusion. So these are different article sections. The requirements of a good article: clarity, self-critical approach, and the remaining 4, which you all are obviously well aware of. And you have got these presentation aids, and the presentation aids are prose, which is the writing that you do. You've got figures, you've got tables, and you've got animations. So you nowadays papers allow animations to be uploaded online. So animations are also something worth considering. And finally, you have the tools that we discussed today, which is the structure, the hooks, the mind maps, rubrics, reflective thinking, 1 to 3 punch, and checklists. So yeah, I didn't talk about checklists. Let's reserve that for another day. Okay, so here's another homework for you. So what we have discussed so far, again, going back to the beginning, we said that we'll start to consider paper a paper as a way of teaching our peers what we have done, or teaching our peers a new concept that we have found out, and how you can use different tools to reinforce that learning outcome. The workflow that you will design will help you to ensure that what you write, whatever tools that you use, the figures that you make, will align well to your abstract. Okay, so you can follow this this task step by step to arrive at your own workflow. So using at least two of the tools discussed today, design a workflow for ensuring constructive alignment in your writing. Okay, that's number one. Then demonstrate that you have used the reflective process discussed in your design workflow. Okay. When designing your workflow, ask yourself, why are you writing the paper? Who is your target audience? What kind of paper you're writing? What item comes first? What item is the last one? Which structure is suited best for your work? What are your hooks? What are your learning outcomes? Okay. And discuss how you will verify whether your writing is constructively aligned. Okay. So this is a bit more challenging. I would like you to think about it. Like, how will you ensure that your writing is constructively aligned? And this is the key bit. This philosophy actually says, this method actually says you start from the abstract. If you look elsewhere, if you look at other techniques, there are also some very well-established scientists who say that don't start from the abstract, start from your results or start from what you have already. It's all well and good, but if you're out to teach or if you're out to share your results with someone, if you don't know what you're going to share with them, it's going to be difficult to convince them of what you're going to share with them. So that's why I think, personally, I think that starting from the abstract is very important. You start from the abstract, you say that this is what I'm going to teach you. And then from that point on, whatever you present are going to be aligned with whatever you said that you're going to do. Okay. So, and the thing is, so you don't have to stick to your abstract. As in you make that for your first draft, you set out and you write that abstract. You do your first draft. And by the time you finish writing the first draft, it may come to you that there are a couple of things which you didn't understand properly in the beginning, but you understand better. Just go and change the abstract and then rewrite it again. That's your second draft. But the important thing is, if you follow this philosophy, if you use these tools, at least the first draft will be out. Believe me when I say this, the first draft is the most difficult, and I'm sure you'll also agree, it is the most difficult one to get out. One full paper, to get it out is difficult. The idea is, if you use these techniques, that one full paper will take you 1 week. I can give it to you in writing. I've done this several times. I've done it with my PhD students several times. 1 week, you can get out your first draft very easily. Okay. So if you follow this workflow, design your own workflow using these principles of constructive alignment, and then also try it with some results that you have. You can even work. You can also use. You can also apply it to your conference papers. They are shorter, so you can also try it with that. Okay. So wrapping it up, let's go back to learning outcomes that I said that you'll be learning. Okay. So the first one was, I said that you'll identify the analogies between constructive alignment in learning and constructive alignment in academic writing. So we clearly identified the abstract as the one which underscores the learning outcomes of the paper, and the different sections of the paper that need to be aligned to help achieve the intended learning outcomes. Use writing devices to structure your academic writing. We used frameworks like elevator pitches, 1 to 3 punch writing, and even musical forms. And we also saw how we could, one sec, the video is blocking it. Yes. We also saw how we could use these forms to reinforce which are the learning outcomes. Okay. Then choose between different brainstorming and decision-making tools to further aid your constructive alignment. So we used mind maps, SWOT, SWOT, noise, and reflective analysis to help align our writing to the abstract. Evaluate and design your workflow to generate pieces of academic literature. We combine the different writing devices and tools to structure our own reflective workflow. So this one is more linking back to the workshop that I usually do with the students. So by the time they complete the workshop, they would have this workflow designed already, and they would be able to use it for writing the papers or articles or whatnot. Okay. So yeah, with that, I wrap up my presentation. Thank you for your time. And this whole set of this lecture is also written in a blog form. It is written in 4 parts. It's available on my website, so you can always have a look there. So all the information that's presented here and some more is available on the website. So thank you for your time, and I hope that you found it informative and useful. And I can take questions now.
Thank you, sir. So if anybody has questions, please ask, or you can type in the chat box.
So I do have a question here from, one second, let me see if I can expand it. So I have a question from Shreya Sharma. You are welcome to ask, and I can answer the other question. So can the audience talk via the mics perhaps, or is it possible? Yeah, Yogesh, I already shared the information. One second, let me stop sharing. Can you elaborate on being self-critical or self-analysis? Self-analysis, well, I don't know how you can make a distinction between it, how you can distinguish between that. What I mean by self-critical is the results itself which you have presented. So, for instance, if you're doing an experiment and you say that, okay, I found there is a smooth graph, for instance, you've got a Gaussian curve, and then you say that this is the result. But then you also know that you have got a resolution limitation, which doesn't allow you to resolve those features which might be happening on those smooth graphs. So you are being self-critical and saying that, yes, I've observed a smooth graph, but at the same time, I'm limited by the resolution of my devices. So it is possible that I could have these ripples, and these ripples can actually come from other aspects. So these ripples can come from some other physical phenomena which is underlying. So it gives you more talking points. That's what I mean. So that's what I mean by being self-critical. Self-analysis, I'm not really sure where I mentioned that, but being self-critical, I think, is more important. Okay, so that's one from the Q&A section. Let me see if I can see in any of the chat section. Okay, so Shreya Sharma, sir, so the question is, could you please share your experiment? Okay, so the question is, could you please share your experience whenever you read a book and realize that this book is not worth your attention? Because while reading a bit late, we realize that this book is not good for research, but by that time, it's too late. So this is why your supervisor actually steps in. So this is why your supervisor says, don't waste time behind that book. And if they do say that, there is actually an element of truth in it, because they would have read that book. So that's number one. Number two is, if you start reading a book, it's always worth reading the preface. So I would strongly recommend reading the preface. Okay. Because there it actually tells you what is the motivation of the speaker, or what is the motivation of the author in writing that book. And if you see that the motivations do not match, that itself you got your flag. So that's number two. Number three is look at the figures. So that's what I always do. I look at the figures, and if I see that the figures are not really conveying the information that I need, I don't read that book. I might reserve it. If somebody says that, oh, no, you should read that book, it's pretty good, I would perhaps put it away and then I would read some book which I find more informative for native for myself. Yes, yes. So that's my answer. Okay, I have another question. What do we mean by pitch? So pitch is this was this elevator pitch, I presume, that we are talking about. So this was again where you get into an elevator with Elon Musk and you are pitching your idea. You are basically saying that this is what I can do, but I need money for it. And you have to pitch your idea in a way where you are convincing, you are confident, and you also say that there are going to be guaranteed returns. So that's where the concept of pitch comes in. In the case of the elevator pitch, in the case of the abstract, or in the case of the movie trailer, what you're doing is in a short amount of time, you're telling the person that this is what this paper, or this is what the book, or this is what the movie is going to give you in return of your time. And that message has to be extremely convincing. So that is what I mean by pitch. Okay. Is the talk currently being recorded? Yeah, I guess so. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. Okay. Great. If you have,
I have a question. Can you hear me?
yeah, is it you, Shaker?
Yeah. So
Yeah, sure.
I just missed the thing when you were giving an example of the Ohm's law that is a straight line, and then you have to look at the different possibilities, right? Whether power supply may have some problem, or material have high or low resistance. You gave the name to this particular way of analysis, right? What was the name for that?
Most likely I was talking about Hobbes and Gibbs cycle, most likely.
Okay. Can you go? Okay, it's not on.
Okay, if you
Okay,
want, I
maybe I'll
can.
discuss with you. I'll discuss with you and later on.
Sure. Again, this information is also available on the
Yeah.
website.
It's there. Okay. It was a nice talk. I mean, good learning for at least for me.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah.
Because we never think in this direction. We just keep on doing our work. We get our result, abstract, and all the things we write and do it. And I hope
Yeah.
our work is matching all these criteria what you have shown. And so, yeah.
No. I think even in I have found that even when I'm writing a conference, so in the conference, the abstract is like 25, like 65 words.
Right.
And to convince the chair or the working group that your paper is worth it, that's a difficult task. So it's very condensed information. But even in those circumstances, you can actually use these techniques and you can actually structure your uh, figures in a way that it just gets through. Just the figure is enough. Nobody will have time to read your write up. They'll be looking at your figures. So how to make that figure link to
Yeah,
the abstract?
you put that very nicely. The way we read the paper, we look at the title and then we flip it. And then we found some figure very interesting. Okay, fine, abstract. And then we go for discussion. If interesting, then we go for the detail. So basically, these are the figures. And then like that. Okay, thank you.
Yep, my pleasure. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, they can write me an email for sure. Or you can just yeah, if you see me somewhere, just say hi. That's good enough. Okay. Okay.
So SCRI team, is the talk over?
Yes, sir. We are just concluding the session.
Okay.
Since we do not have any further doubts and questions, we are moving towards the conclusion.
Yeah.
So, I, Prachi, on behalf of SCRI, the collaborators, researchers community, and the entire fraternity of IIT Mandi, extend a hearty thanks to Dr. Srikanth Sugavanam, sir, who managed to spare some time from his busiest schedule and made this event a resounding success. Dear sir, your thoughts have enlightened our minds and definitely they have shown us a new path of career. Further, I am also grateful to Mr. Shekhar Yadav for providing the encouragement in the very beginning of the session. Finally, I would like to thank the budding audience for attending this session and keeping up the encouraging and enthusiasm. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Oh,
Thank
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.